Therefore, the flood didn't take place. Then as the research evolved, you had independent evidence accumulating in western Montana by J.T. Pardee, who was with the U.S. Geological Survey. And he was investigating evidence that the mountain valleys of western Montana had been filled up with an enormous volume of water. And this volume of water seemed to be exactly the same time as Bretz's floods. He then assumed that this was a giant lake. And because you can see, and we can, I think we have some images. I think Jamie has some images, so we'll pull them up shortly. We're on the mountainside, you see the shorelines etched, 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And what he then decided was that based upon an old 19th century interpretation by T.C. Chamberlain, that there had been an ice dam, he said, well, there must have been an ice dam west of here somewhere in the Clark Fork Valley, a giant lake backed up, burst through the ice dam, and then this is what would have caused Harl and Bretz's floods. So now the geological community is shifting because, number one, the evidence is overwhelming and they can't deny it anymore. But what they're doing is looking for a gradualist or a more uniformitarian explanation. So they immediately latched onto this, well, there was a giant pro-glacial or in front of a glacial lake in western Montana. Well, you're talking about somewhere between 520 and 550 cubic miles of water. That's a lot of water, right? Normally, when you have a large lake, you have a huge catchment basin that is feeding lots of streams and rivers that are feeding into that lake. When you look at any of the big lakes around North America, you have the lake, and then you have this big old catchment basin, and all of that's feeding in. In Lake Missoula, the whole lake fills almost the whole catchment basin. It's like, to me, what they did was they said, okay, we're just going to push the source of the water from here over to here, but let's not go into the question of where did the water come from that's filling these mountain valleys of western Montana. And this is what I spent a couple of weeks in September going up into some of these, following these valleys up into British Columbia. And there's spectacular evidence. And it's almost like the American geologists stop at the 49th parallel, and they say, well, that's the Canadians' preserve up there. We'll let them, they've got their own theories, we've got ours. Interestingly, the Canadians are saying that we think that the water for these floods came from up here. But they don't like that because, you see, one of the leading geologists who's saying that these floods came from Canada is John Shaw, who basically came up with this idea that drumlins, which are these inverted boat hull-shaped landforms that are found by hundreds of thousands in the regions where glaciers were, that they were formed not by the glaciers grinding over the landscape, but they were actually formed by massive subglacial flows of water. And his critics have all been saying, well, here's the problem. What's the source of your water? Therefore, it wasn't water, it wasn't subglacial floods. It parallels the Harl and Bretz's story very closely. Well, here's the thing. Shaw and his colleagues couldn't really come up with a plausible explanation for how you could form these massive subglacial reservoirs. In fact, what they call the Livingstone Lake event required 84,000 cubic kilometers of water. And 84,000 kilometers, I can do it really quickly here. We divide that by 36. That's about 2,300 cubic miles of water. That's more than all of the Great Lakes combined, vastly bigger than all of the Great Lakes combined. It's probably every lake in North America combined. And he said this one event required over 2,000 cubic miles of water. Well, where did that water come from? So he basically said, well, there must have been a reservoir somehow that formed. His critics have said, that's impossible. You couldn't form that much water under the ice sheet. Well, what's happened now is the idea